You know that whole allure of Western luxury, it's everywhere. These images, this idea of high-end European goods, sophisticated lifestyles,
Hmm.
it really makes you wonder sometimes what's actually behind that shiny reputation.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly what we're diving into today.
We are.
We've got this really interesting piece from Mark at Knowledge is King. And he really pulls apart this whole concept, this idea that Western luxury is just inherently better.
Right. Forget the glossy ads for a sec.
Exactly. This text is asking us to think about some maybe less comfortable things. Like, where does that perception even come from?
And that's kind of our mission for you, the learner, today. We're going to unpack Mark's arguments. He suggests pretty strongly that this status, this Western luxury thing, might actually be built on, well, things like exploitation,
Uh-huh.
cultural appropriation, and maybe even some clever storytelling, let's say.
Yeah, propaganda is a word he uses.
Right, so it's about getting these critical perspectives that maybe get lost in all the marketing buzz.
And what's really striking, like right from the get-go, is how Mark questions this link we automatically make. You know, West equals luxury, West equals excellence.
Mhm.
He's not just saying, oh, that bag is overpriced. He's questioning the whole foundation of that idea.
Okay, so let's dig into that first bit then. This illusion of excellence.
Mhm.
Mark puts forward this idea that the West sometimes takes products, maybe made somewhere else entirely,
Right.
slaps their own brand on it, and markets it like it's somehow, superior because of the label.
Mm.
He names names too, like Gucci and Tommy Hilfiger, says they're part of this illusion.
Yeah, and it's not just about like slick marketing, according to Mark. He argues this actually undermines the original creators, which is a serious point.
It is. What does that really mean, though, undermine?
Well, think about it. It's not just, who gets the name on the tag. It's about who gets the money, whose skills are actually valued, whose traditions are seen as important in the, global economy.
Okay, right. So it shifts the value away from the actual making of the thing.
That seems to be the argument. And Mark, he doesn't really mince words here. He basically says this helps keep up this idea of Western superiority.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty direct hit, tying luxury to these, well, ethical questions about fairness, equity.
And this connects to the next big point, doesn't it? The text gets into systemic exploitation.
It does. This is where it gets quite critical. Mark points to how, allegedly, many luxury brands rely on, cheaper labor in developing countries.
Right. The low wages, the working
Yeah.
conditions, things we don't see in the ads.
Exactly. Concerns about safety, regulations, it's often hidden. And he suggests this isn't just like one or two bad apples. It might be embedded in the system, in the supply chains, which are often, deliberately murky.
Hard to trace back.
Very hard, which
Right.
makes it easier for these issues to just continue.
And this is where Mark brings in the historical context, which is pretty heavy. He connects it back. He mentions the U.S. economy's foundation in chattel slavery.
He does. It's a stark point that the way wealth was built up in the West historically is deeply tied up with exploiting people.
So the argument is that the very ability of the West to project this image of luxury, this wealth, has roots in, well, profound injustice.
Yeah, a legacy that some argue still kind of echoes in how the global economy works today.
How those historical power dynamics might still be playing out.
Right. And the text also mentions things like middlemen and price gouging, suggesting there are these layers in the system built to maximize profit.
Often at the expense of the people doing the actual work.
That seems to be the implication, yes.
Okay, so after exploitation, Mark shifts again. He talks about colonialism and cultural appropriation. This challenges the idea that, European goods just are the definition of luxury.
Exactly. He's saying it's not some natural thing. He brings in the history of European colonization, Africa, Asia, Latin America. It wasn't just about taking resources, right? It was also about imposing culture, imposing aesthetics. Mark argues that this dominance led to European designs being seen as the standard, as superior,
While the local indigenous designs and traditions were.
devalued, pushed aside.
Yeah.
And then there's the cultural appropriation part, taking elements from those cultures, often without credit or compensation.
And using them in these Western luxury goods.
Right. Which kind of reinforces that dominance all over again. It makes the Western version seem like the real thing.
So, wow. It's suggesting the very idea of what we consider luxurious is tied up in this historical power imbalance. Not just about the quality of the item itself.
Precisely. It's about the history, the influence, the narrative, which leads perfectly into the next point, media and advertising.
Ah, yes. The power of the image.
Totally. The text argues that media and advertising are crucial in building and maintaining this image of the West as, wealthy, sophisticated, the place where luxury comes from.
Which naturally makes people want those European goods.
It fuels the desire, yeah.
Okay, so it's building a story around the product. And Mark uses this really strong term here, propaganda racism. Can you unpack that a bit? It sounds intense.
It is a strong term. The core idea, as presented in the text, is that how different cultures and races are portrayed in media can subtly, or maybe not so subtly, elevate one group, like Europeans in this context, making their culture seem more refined or advanced.
And implicitly making others seem less so.
Exactly. And if one group's culture is seen as the pinnacle, then their products, their luxury goods automatically seem more desirable, more valuable. It boosts the perceived value.
Okay, I see. So this indoctrination, as Mark calls it, it can lead people to just believe that European stuff is inherently higher quality, worth the huge price tag, without maybe questioning it too much.
Right. And he argues this belief isn't always grounded in, objective reality. It's shaped by this narrative.
And what's the consequence of that, according to him?
Well, beyond just ignoring the original creators or the exploitation we talked about, Mark suggests it leads to an unhealthy obsession with material possessions.
Buying for status, not for the thing itself.
Pretty much. It becomes less about appreciating, say, the craftsmanship or the materials, and more about the image, the status symbol that the brand projects.
The symbol over the substance. Okay, so he paints a pretty critical picture. Does Mark offer any way forward? Any solutions?
He does. He doesn't just leave it at critique. The text ends with a call, really, for us to challenge these ideas, to question this automatic link between the West, excellence, and luxury.
To recognize the harm and injustice, as he puts it.
Yeah. To acknowledge the history, the exploitation, the cultural appropriation that he argues is tangled up in it all. It's about facing those less comfortable parts of the story.
Right, confronting it.
And he says it's not just on us as individuals. He calls for holding companies accountable, pushing for things like fair trade, sustainable fashion.
So systemic change, too, not just changing our own shopping habits.
Exactly, though he does turn the questions back on us, the consumers.
He does, doesn't he? What were those questions again?
He asks us to think, do we really need these expensive European goods? Or are we maybe, buying into the propaganda, buying into the status game?
That's a direct challenge to our motivations.
It is. It makes you pause and think about why you want something.
And what's the alternative he suggests?
He suggests shifting our focus. Instead of just chasing luxury labels, value ethical practices. He mentions supporting smaller businesses, ones that prioritize fair labor, maybe use sustainable methods.
Redefining value, essentially.
That's a great way to put it. Finding luxury not in a potentially problematic status symbol, but in things like ethical production, respecting different cultures, genuine craftsmanship, wherever it comes from.
Okay. So wrapping it all up then.
Right.
Mark's core argument, based on this text, is that this glossy image of Western luxury, it kind of hides a more complicated, sometimes darker history.
Yeah, a history involving exploitation, cultural appropriation, and some very effective persuasion or propaganda.
In his conclusion, what's true luxury in his view?
According to the text, true luxury lies in ethical practices and an appreciation for diverse cultures. It's about moving towards a more just and inclusive world, valuing skill and fairness over, perhaps, oppression.
That's definitely a lot to think about, a really different lens to view something so familiar through.
Absolutely.
So for you, the learner, maybe the next time you see those ads or walk past those high-end stores, just pause for a second. Think about the story behind the gloss. What does luxury truly mean to you? And how might these ideas we've talked about today maybe reshape how you see things, how you view global trade, culture, value?
Yeah, definitely food for thought.